All right, everyone. I apologize for that. I'm going to crosstalk on Zoom is very, very difficult. And with now 120 different computers logged into this session, um, I think it's best that we put everyone on mute for the time being and remind everyone that the chat function is functioning at the bottom of your screens. And we're going to use that this evening, I hope, so that we can field some questions for this interesting conversation on the intersection of Jews and secular culture celebrated through Christmas and Chinese food and the movie and the music. And we'll talk a bit about the history uh, of our relationship to Christmas a little bit too. Rabbi Sachs, let me make sure. Are you on mute? Or
I am
can we hear
not.
you?
I'm here.
Okay, so why don't you begin by introducing yourself, just so people on the call who don't know you can get a
Uh,
chance to meet you. You've been around for a while, but
Been around for a bit. I'm Rabbi
yeah.
Sachs, the associate rabbi here at Beth Tikva, Louis Sachs, and really excited to spend my Erev Christmas with all of you here, talking about all of these great things, the music, the Chinese food, all of this. I'm looking forward to tonight. I think it'll be a fun discussion.
And I'm Rabbi Jared Grover. For those of you I haven't met yet, I'm a senior rabbi, currently not in Toronto, uh, but it is wonderful to see so many faces. I wish I could just go around and say hello to you each individually, but I'm sending you lots of good wishes through what I know is a difficult time, a very strange time uh, for our community. This is a wonderful way that we can be apart and still be together. I thought that it might be wise to start off this program um, by talking a little bit about the history here. Is that okay, Rabbi Sachs, if we spend a couple moments talking about Nittelnacht? And this wasn't in the movie, but might be a good preface to our discussions about the movie.
I think it's a great place to start. I've been seeing a lot of articles about Niddelnacht this year, which is something I don't think anyone ever really talks about, but it's been picked up in a lot of the Jewish press this year. I don't know if you've noticed that.
And last year, if I remember correctly, you had a session on
We did a
Nittelnacht.
shiur on it. Yeah, we did a little teaching on it. It's a really interesting Jewish holiday. So I'll let you take it away and I'll chime in as I.
Yeah, chime in and correct me in case I say something that disagreed with what you covered last year. Um, my information about Nittelnacht comes from Rebecca Scharbach, whose article on this subject in the Jewish Academic Review a few years ago um, I found to be very comprehensive, well written, well researched. She talks about where Nittelnacht comes from and takes a really interesting approach towards the individual customs that are observed or that were observed in the early modern period on Christmas Eve by Jews. So some of you might not know this, and this is why some of you said, "Oh, Rabbi's making a very serious face earlier." It's because it is shocking to hear still, and I've heard about this for many years now, but it's still shocking for me to read about the Jewish practices in the 16th and 17th centuries, mostly, um, that would take place on Christmas Eve uh, by Jews in Eastern Europe. Um, we're talking about a cluster of different Jewish observances that were carried out on Christmas Eve. Um, they include putting aside holy books. On Christmas Eve, Jews are not allowed to, were not allowed on Nittelnacht, what was called Nittelnacht. By the way, what is Nittelnacht? So there's an argument about what Nittelnacht is. That's what tonight is called. Um, Nittel probably comes from the Latin name for Christmas. If you go to Italy today, I think they wish each other Merry Christmas by saying Buona Natale. And in French, they say Joyeux Noël. So Nittel comes from Natali, Nittelnacht. But there's a different read on that. If you know Hebrew, the word to hang as in hanging on a cross, is litol or talui. So it's possible that the sort of Ashkenazi Jews in the early modern period liked this word Nittelnacht because it was a mockery of Christmas, almost like a night of commemoration of the guy who was hung. And it could have been a way of mocking the Natali uh, of Christmas by saying, look at even the Christians celebrate the birth of this false Messiah by calling him the hanged man. Um, in the Jewish read of Jesus's life, and this is also, you know, shocking for a lot of people, but there Jesus appears in many different places in classical Jewish literature. There's a whole Hebrew book written about Jesus's life called Toldot Yeshu, the stories of Yeshu. And in the Jewish account, he is not hung. He's not crucified on a cross. He's hung. Um, but because Jesus appears, we tend to forget that, you know, this Messiah of the Christians was also uh, one of our own, uh, a rabbi even. And so he appears in Jewish literature. We have our own gospel, our own version of the story, which is not something that we talk about because it's not a nice story. Um, and on Nittelnacht, all that is Christmas Eve, um, we put aside all holy books. There's no learning that's allowed to take place. No sexual relations are allowed. There's a tradition of consuming garlic. So I don't know if anybody ordered the garlic chicken tonight, but if you did so, it's in keeping with a long-standing Jewish custom. Tradition of staying up late and holding rowdy communal gatherings involving mostly the playing of cards. Now, what is this all about? Strange. Jews, we have written textual sources as early as the 17th century talking about Jews staying up all night, eating garlic or hanging garlic around, and holding these big gatherings and playing cards. So, Rabbi Sachs, last year, what was your conclusion? Why did Jews do this?
Well, there are all sorts of different reasons that are given, right? Folk reasons, but really it's a very practical issue. Of centuries and centuries, Jews faced pogroms and massacres. And so much of that was often inspired by a rousing sermon during a Catholic mass or Christian mass about what the Jews did to Jesus. So Christmas became a day that Jews would stay inside. They would blow out the candles. They wouldn't be up studying Torah. There'd be nothing lit that they could read by. They wouldn't congregate in synagogues or in other gatherings. And they would stay essentially in the dark and hope that their Christian neighbors didn't come to town and murder them. And it's sad that we saw this last week of Hanukkah, that there's still some, or not with Christian neighbors in general, but that even now public displays of Judaism haven't changed so much, even though Niddelnacht seems so far and out there, I think, to the modern Jew. We saw in Hanukkah gatherings just this last week in the States, things like that happened.
So that's very interesting. Your explanation is what I heard this morning from a friend of mine. I was talking to him about the same thing. He said, yeah, Nittelnach is because of the pogroms. We had to stay quiet, turn off the lights, and it's because we were afraid. Scharbach in her article says that is complete nonsense. This has nothing to do. I'm sorry to destroy the class you gave last year, but it's good we're doing this program, you see.
It's fair, although you're not really destroying it. She is.
Okay, so that's true. That's true.
I can take
Scharbach
that.
says it's nonsense, and you know that it's nonsense because what does garlic have to do with pogroms, right? there was no we have no record anywhere of mass pogroms against Jews on Christmas Eve. We have many on Easter, but Christmas Eve was not a night known to be a particularly dangerous night for Jews. What we do have, and what Sharbach says, is we have a lot of stories in the Jewish tradition and in the Christian tradition too, of Christmas Eve being a night of mystical things and ghosts and people coming back from the dead, a night of demons coming out. And this is really fascinating because um, when does Christmas take place? The darkest time of the year. That's not an accident. And what does, by the way, Christmas, everybody knows, is not mentioned anywhere in the Gospels. It does not say when Jesus was born. But the myth is that if a redeemer is going to come in the world, then the redeemer has to come during the period of hopelessness, during a period where it seems most, quote unquote, dark. So obviously, we pick a date around the winter solstice, which already had some connotations for in pagan. There were some pagan holidays that were also celebrated during this time. And so a redeemer comes to that world during the dark time to save the world from the pits of darkness. And the eve of when that redeemer comes in the world is when the world is at its lowest point, its darkest point. And Sharbach says that Christians really believe that the day before Christmas was the most dangerous night of the year. Now, we actually have still today some remnant of this, even in modern American cultural Christmas. Everybody knows Santa Claus, right? What could be more friendly than Santa Claus? You think of Santa Claus, he puts a smile on your face. But what's the whole idea of Santa Claus? If you're a good boy, you get gifts under the tree. The whole idea of gifts under the tree of Christmas is if you're, I forget, there's some Christmas song like this. Speaking of Christmas songs, I don't know if anybody knows. Write for me in the chat box, but it says you get a gift. Santa's bringing gifts to all the good little girls and boys, right? Well, what happens if you're not a good little boy or not good little girl? We don't. What if you don't make the list? It sounds a little bit like Kotvenu b'Sefer HaChaim, right? Our high holiday list. But we actually have in modern this remnant of a very old tradition, Christian tradition, that a demon, that Santa Claus is not friendly. Santa Claus is a demon that comes back from the dead. Hello, Saint Nicholas is coming back from the dead. And while, yes, he'll reward the good little girls and the good little boys, the bad little boys and the bad little girls are going to get punished. This is a remnant of the way Christmas used to be. And by the way, this is a big reminder, watching this movie, of how our version of American Canadian Christmas is such a cultural innovation for our time and our place. It's I remember once seeing Christmas celebrated in other places in the world. There are some places in the world where there is no Santa Claus. He's somebody else. Still today.
Germany has Krampus, who's Santa's assistant, who goes around and whips the bad children.
Look at that. Wow.
So it's definitely fascinating, the cultural impact, which I think goes back to, I'm going to cut you off, sorry, but
Go ahead.
Just going back to what you were saying before, though, it's interesting how it's affected by the culture, because there was so much superstition and so much mysticism and ghosts and all of that during those time periods. I mean, a lot of Kabbalah has a lot of that idea of demonology and spirits and all of that as well, which kind of developed in similar places and times. But just in response, it's interesting that it's an Ashkenazi custom, Niddelnacht, right? It was
Yes.
developed actually in places where Christmas was originally celebrated in January.
Yes.
So Niddelnacht really is traditionally then, but it's not developed in the Sephardic communities in places where we had Muslim neighbors. So I just want to push back on that thought that Niddelnacht really is a custom of Christian communities that faced that. So I think there's a lot of the superstitious aspects of the garlic and everything else. But I think that the essence of the holiday really was, if you look historically, forgetting the folk cult, the customs, the culture, and the customs, and that the superstitious aspect, all the idea of staying in that was nothing in Sephardic communities. And we had peaceful relations with our neighbors. There was no such thing as Niddelnacht.
That's right. This was all a reaction to a night of ghosts and demons that Jews were perceiving in the Christian world around them, which is added proof that the theme of this movie, which is that Jews helped create a new version of Christmas in America with our songs, but it's much more than that. Um, that Christmas is a time of consumerism and joy and happiness and neighborliness. Nonsense. Only a couple of hundred years before, it was a night of terror before the Redeemer was to come. And Santa Claus could be a terrorizing figure. And Jews were afraid too. Now, they weren't afraid of Santa Claus. Scharbach says that Jews were afraid that Jesus was coming. And now remember, we believed in this man named Jesus. We didn't believe in the Gospels, but we knew that he existed. And what was Jesus going to do? He was going to torment them, torment the Jews, um, because the Jews were the ones who were responsible for his hanging or his crucifixion. Now, this shocks everybody, right? It shocks everybody that Jews admit to crucifying Jesus, because this was the classic assault by Christians against Jews. You are Christ killers. And it's outrageous anti-Semitism to say something like that, isn't it? Well, if I showed you Toldot Yeshu, and even the famous story in the Talmud about what happened to Jesus after he died, Jews take ownership in these sources, and they're proud of it. We killed him. He was a traitor. He was a troublemaker, and he was teaching things against our official positions, a blasphemer, and we are proud of what we did to him. And on Christmas Eve, we keep watch because the Goyim say that he's coming back, and we're afraid that maybe he'll come back um, and be angry at us and take revenge for what we did to him. It's. I'll send anybody this article who'd like to read it. It's it's outrageous and fantastic at the same time. But what she says, it's interesting, is by the 18th century, the rabbis were getting very upset. That is, the community leadership was getting very upset at Nittelnach custom. This happened in the 16th, 17th century. It became widely practiced. And by the 18th century, the rabbinic leadership was saying to the community, you've got to stop this. This is an outrage. We don't believe in the power of garlic. We don't believe that Jesus is coming back. And the rabbis actually struggled to get the people to stop observing Nittelnach. It was so popular that they couldn't stop the people from these card games. By the way, does everyone understand why these individual customs all relate to demonology much more than they relate to Rabbi Sachs's argument. I'm sorry, I'm not blaming you, Rabbi Sachs, but what you posited
I
last
just
year
heard
that this
what
was
you do to
about
people who
pogroms.
disagree with you. So I'll shut
No,
up.
no,
I'm
no,
not
no,
going to
no, no, no,
disagree
no,
with you now.
no, no, because I used to think too that this had to do with pogroms,
Now that I know
this
what the
article
rabbis do to anyone they don't like.
it makes a lot more sense. Think about it. Eating garlic. Well, garlic wards off. Everybody knows this who knows the story of Dracula, right? Wards off the evil spirits. What is it in why card games? Well, because card games, that's randomness, chaos. It confuses the demons to play cards. Why do we stay up all night? So we can keep watch and make sure that nothing bad is going to happen. And why no sexual relations? We actually have a Jewish source that says any Jewish child born on Christmas Eve conceived on Christmas Eve is destined to be inhabited by an evil spirit. There's an actual Jewish source that says that. And there was one more thing. Oh, studying Torah. Why not study Torah? Because studying Torah, these are holy books, and if we open them up, then the sacred words will be exposed to the demons that are out there, and they will be corrupted by them. Anyway, it's a fascinating article. I'm not planning on staying
I've
up
seen
all
other
night
Hasidic
tonight. Go ahead.
sources. Sorry, just to add there. I've seen some Hasidic sources that talk about the not studying Torah. Again, it's part of that superstition, but we study Torah for someone we love that we've lost in their honor to help redeem their soul. And there's a Hasidic source that talks about the fear that they don't want their Torah study to merit Jesus instead. They're afraid that he'll get the merit then for their Torah study.
Very interesting, right? We don't want to be studying Torah in honor of Christmas. It makes it seem like
If
we're
his soul's
celebrating
roaming
Christmas too.
around, it's going to get the merit of our Torah study as opposed
Okay, so
to
you're seeing what I'm seeing, that there are those sources out there that say Jesus' soul is actually roaming around tonight, and Jews need to be on guard.
absolutely. I've never denied the superstitious
Okay,
aspects of it. We're in agreement there.
fascinating stuff, scary, outrageous kinds of material that I really would be so ashamed if ever the secular press got a hold of any of this stuff. But we have to own our heritage, and this is part of it. But as I said, the rabbis, there's what's called folk religion, right? Rabbi Sachs and I can talk to you a lot about folk religion. Um, what is folk religion? The things that the people feel are important from a religious point of view. It's not always in sync with what the rabbis feel the people should be prioritizing.
I
We've
always like
actually
as an
been talking a
example
lot about that
Aleinu,
this year. Yeah, go ahead.
right? I think Aleinu is always a great example of that. Because if you ever went to a synagogue and the service didn't end with Aleinu, you would think that it wasn't, so Jewish. But most people don't realize that Aleinu in a daily service is a very modern invention. It was part of the high holidays,
Right.
and that was it. And for centuries, the rabbis tried to limit it when they saw it being done in daily practice. But it was just very popular. People liked Aleinu for whatever reason, and it became very popular amongst the communities and started to worm its way in and became now a staple of not just Shacharit, but the evening service as well. It's a part of everything.
So this reinvention of Christmas, fascinating. What did you think, Rabbi Sachs, of the movie?
I really enjoyed it. It was very interesting to see because I know there's a lot of Jews that were a part of making not Christmas carols, but these popular Christmas music. I always was aware of that, but I never really stopped to think about it. And it was interesting to hear the different theories and ideas from those that talked about, right, it was just business. If you write a Hanukkah song, how many people are going to buy that? But you write a good Christmas song, you have millions and millions and millions of people to buy it. But also just the idea of it being part of that American experience of coming to America, And Christmas not being a Christian holiday really, but just being an American phenomenon. And a part of being an American meant these participating in that and being a part of the Christmas story, which I think
Eh,
that's where I'm interested. I'm curious. Like I grew up in Los Angeles, you grew up in
Right. So I
Montreal.
was just going to ask you. So you're our American now, even though I'm in America and you're
Well, I'm
in
curious how
Canada
our
right now.
Christmas has differed growing up.
Right.
You want to start? You want me to talk about my
No,
Christmas?
I want to hear about what is Christmas like in LA.
It's a beautiful time of year.
Yeah.
Everybody's nice on the freeways. Everybody, no. Christmas was, it was always interesting. I grew up in public school. I was not a day school kid or anything. So I grew up with a lot of Jewish friends from synagogue and things like that. But I also grew up with a lot of non-Jewish friends. And I was always the kid who was jealous of everyone else putting up Christmas lights and all of that. But seeing as well as I had friends who were Jewish and they put up the blue and white lights. My parents never did that. We were not that family. But I had friends also that had Christmas trees that they would have at the top of it a big Jewish star or other Jewish ornaments and things on it, even though right it wasn't an interfaith family or anything like that. It was just simply for them this was part of like a secular season they wanted to be a part of. I have to admit, my mother, this is I hope I know we're recording this, so she'll see it at some point, maybe. I love you. I'm sorry. Um, right? There's that image of like the Jewish mother who's a little neurotic, overthinks things. We got Christmas presents from Santa when I was little. And the reason being a little bit we said before, Santa
Wow.
gives gifts to what kind of kids does Santa give gifts to?
Good little boys and good little girls.
And she didn't want us to think that we weren't good because we were Jewish. So Santa would give us a little something every year on Christmas so that we could go to school and talk about, oh, we were good and Santa gave us something. As we got older, we got greedy and just, wanted gifts and things. But it was such a
So
part of the
interesting because it
atmosphere.
relates to Nittelnacht, right? Jews always watching what is going on on the other side of town and in modern America at the house next door, right? What is going on and where do I fit in that story? So 200 years ago, where do I fit in that story? Oh, it's a night of demons. I better watch out and protect myself. It in modern America, oh, it's a night where the good kids are rewarded. So I hope I get rewarded too.
Someone commented that when they were growing up, that people in LA had Hanukkah bushes and blue and white trees, blue and white lights. It was
Right.
a very common thing that I saw around. I'm curious, Rabbi, in Montreal, was there anything like that in Canada?
Not that I know of. I don't know of many of my friends that had Hanukkah bushes or Christmas trees. I don't know why. I think we need a good anthropologist here to tell us whether there's a cultural difference in Montreal or in Toronto with regards to how Jews see themselves vis-a-vis Christmas.
I mean, things like
Um,
Chrismico was just part of the lingo growing up.
yeah,
One of the things I saw in the movie that was very, very interesting to me was right. It talked a lot about this idea of how right these Christian right these Christmas songs really didn't have Christian value. They were Jews that were part of just it was an American holiday, and they were celebrating it kind of as Americans, the Jews that were writing it. And one of the first things I always heard when I came to Canada was that the difference between Canada and America is that Canada is a fruit salad, while America is a melting pot.
right.
So part of it was coming to America and kind of brushing off your identity, taking on the local culture. And Christmas, I think, right? Obviously, there's a religious aspect to it, but there's a lot of it that's a cultural aspect. So you were saying that the Christmas celebrated in different parts of the world is so different. So American Christmas is music and is lights and is gifts and all of that. And part of that I think is just being American. So Jews in America, I think it's part of that shedding of identity, being part of the melting pot, which maybe in Canada wasn't such a pressure. I'm curious if there were Canadian Jews that wrote any Christmas songs. I'm not aware of that.
Oh, well, I'll have to leave that to the chat box to see if any one of our participants knows about Canadian Jews' contributions to Christmas. Maybe um oh, what's his name? Who by fire, who by maybe Leonard Cohen wrote something at some point that I don't know of. But um I do find it fascinating the American love for Jewish love for Christmas. Now, just is that where you think it comes from? You said you got gifts on Christmas. Your parents made it special. Is it that family warmth that sets the stage for a Jewish embrace of Christmas, and in some ways not just the embrace, but also feeling left out of the full Christmas package?
I think there's definitely the feeling of being left out. I mean, I always had that. I always was jealous of my friends that had lights and all of that. Although this year I put up over the summer some lights in my backyard to light it at night. And it was so difficult. I don't understand why anyone would want to do this every single year and so many
Put
of
up
them.
lights, right?
I put up a string of lights across a couple trees and I'm leaving them there permanently versus this all over the house for a month. I don't understand who would ever want to do that. But but in my family, it's interesting. We didn't do any of the other stuff. My mom really, I think, believed that we would think we were bad for being Jewish, and was afraid of that. I think it was a legitimate fear of hers, because when we wanted to do things, if me or my siblings ever asked to put up lights or even blue and white ones or a bush or something like that, it was a very strong no. We're Jewish. Jews don't do that.
Right.
But I had lots of Jewish friends though that did, and I think it was just part of the zeitgeist in the states.
So different Jewish families are drawing the lines in different places. There's a line for everybody. It's just different depending on the household. And I think that gets to a fundamental question about this movie, which is whether Christmas has become a cultural celebration much more than it is a religious celebration today. Of course, I don't mean to put down the religious origins of Christmas, but what has it become in our communities? And does that mean that Jews can feel more comfortable with Christmas, almost like in the same way we relate to Thanksgiving? It's not our holiday, but it's a Canadian holiday. Christmas isn't our holiday, but it's a Canadian holiday that we can partake of.
I mean, it's interesting to bring up Thanksgiving, because I was thinking recently about the religious origins of that, right? That at least in America, in the American version of the Puritan settlers sitting down and right offering thanks for surviving the year. For them, it was God's providence sending them to America, sending them to what they thought was, the new Israel, this new promised land. And it really started as a religious thing, versus now it's become so secular, at least in the States. Thanksgiving, it was interesting to me in Canada. Again, I find Jews here don't really have Thanksgiving meals in the same way as
Right.
Jews in America do have Thanksgiving meals.
And this comes up a lot in our discussion with uh, converts and intermarriages, doesn't it? Because um, one of the difficult things for a potential convert to Judaism to explain to her mother and father, it's interesting. The discussions over the years that I've heard of that have been the most painful with parents, they all surround Christmas dinner. It's not about church. Mommy and daddy are okay if you don't come to mass on Christmas Eve, but will you promise us that you'll come to Christmas dinner? And there are cases where parents have just not forgiven their children for leaving that table. So, what do we say as rabbis when a potential convert asks us, what do I tell my parents? They want to know if I can come to Christmas dinner.
I mean, my advice is always, of course you can, right? It's one thing to go there and have some ham, or to go to church and take communion, but the dinner's about family. I think that's what these people are afraid of. The parents of the person converting, is that
Right.
someday their grandchild's not going to be at these family moments, these memories. In a way, I think it's not in the same, obviously, as mourning, but when somebody comes to a parent and says, I'm converting, in a way that parents now mourning the future that they saw, the holiday celebrations that they always pictured having with their child and their grandchildren and everything else. In those moments, I think Christmas in particular is such a big part of that vision for some families of not just the past, but of the future. Right? They picture and imagine seeing their children coming to their home or going to their children's home someday in the future when their kids are grown up. So when that grown up says, "Nuh-uh, we're not having Christmas in my house," I think that can be a very difficult time.
And one of the things that I thought of watching this movie was we, Jews of all people, should be affirming the cultural aspects of Christmas because we're the ones who, in part, helped create what Christmas culture is today. So to deny that this holiday is anything but a religious celebration, it seems incoherent, doesn't it?
It does. I'm curious what your thoughts are. I had a bit of a reputation on occasion in my life of being a rabble rouser. And one of the things I pushed when I was in rabbinical school at the American Jewish University was in December, we'd have all these big signs and decorations on the door when you walked in that were talking about Happy Hanukkah, Hanukkah Sameach, and all of that. And having grown up in public school and been the kid in the Christmas pageant who maybe one year they gave us a dreidel, dreidel, dreidel or something, right, in the school, concert, or maybe they remembered to give us latkes or whatever it was. But so often having Hanukkah excluded from the public celebrations at the mall, there'd be a big Christmas tree and maybe if you're lucky, a little tiny Hanukkah somewhere. I pushed for us to have a Merry Christmas display as well because we had so many students at the school. It's a university, it wasn't a rabbinical school, but there were a lot of undergrads that weren't Jewish. There was an MBA program that was almost entirely non-Jewish, plus all of the non-Jewish employees that made it possible for the school to function. So I always thought that as Jews, having experienced what it's like to have our holiday forgotten about and to be the other, it was really wrong for a Jewish institution to just pretend like Hanukkah was the only holiday that was happening at that time. I always like actually at our staff Hanukkah party when we take the time to wish the non-Jewish staff at the shul a
Yes,
happy
everybody should
Christmas.
know that at the Beth Tikva holiday gathering, Doris is listening into the call. I always bring in a couple of Christmas uh, jingles.
I wasn't going to out
Feliz
you. I'm happy you
Navidad. Nothing
mentioned it.
too crazy, right? Nothing too religious. But if anybody wants to hear Cantor Kavari singing Feliz Navidad, walk around Shul December 2021. You'll see his rendition.
But I love
We'll
that
do Jingle Bells, right? But you're saying it's an acknowledgement.
I love that you do that because
Yeah.
it's saying that we more than anyone should recognize that we're not the only ones with the holiday. And
Yeah.
I don't know about you growing up, but I always like it was very off-putting to me always having my holiday relegated somewhere in the corner of the mall or anything. That was actually my first time ever in Israel was realize I should be looking at the camera, so it looks like I'm looking into your eyes, not your eyes on my screen. Um, my very first time in Israel was a birthright trip while I was in university, and it fell over Hanukkah and Christmas. And for me, my magical like Israel moment, right? Everyone kept talking about how great it was when they saw the wall, when they stepped off the plane, when they entered the old city or Tzfat. I loved Israel, but I didn't have that like magical moment of like, oh my God, like what a special place until it was like the 8th or ninth day of the 10-day trip. And we were at a mall on Christmas Eve, and all I saw were Hanukkah displays and hearing Jewish music and Hanukkah music. And I realized it's the first time I ever was not the other in a place. I was ever in a place that I was the majority. My faith, my beliefs, my culture and community were a part of it. So it just for me it was such a moving thing. So I don't know. Like I love that you do that. That we have those songs in our Hanukkah party at the synagogue to acknowledge that we're not the only ones. That there are other people that are part of our community.
Now, there's another side to this discussion because maybe we should have invited um, a member of the Christian clergy to come join us for this discussion. I think a few of them might be busy tonight, but maybe if we had someone with us, they might, what would they say about this discussion? You know, that there's been a big campaign, Keep Christ in Christmas. That is the campaign against the commercialization of Christmas. Everything that we saw in this documentary, almost mocking the origin of the holiday, the real spirit of the holiday, almost disrespectful of somebody's true religious observance. And I think it's important that we mention that because we also know what it's like to have our holidays um, commercialized. I think that happens at Hanukkah a lot. Um, when I don't know if it's happened to anybody this year, but for the past few days, when you're wishing somebody Merry Christmas and they say in response, "Oh, and Happy Hanukkah," and you have to tell them actually it's not Hanukkah anymore. And I know I'm not I wouldn't be upset at anybody for saying that, but the thought that comes to my mind is, wow, that we outside forces have really turned Hanukkah into the Jewish Christmas. And it doesn't feel good to have a holiday that's very important to you be released into society for society to do what it wants with it, because it can rob it of its true meaning. And I wonder, so if anybody who was watching this documentary, you can write in the comment box, felt a little bit guilty that we had taken this holiday that really is about a serious subject for Christians and have sort of turned it into Disney World a little bit with happy tunes and silly songs. Jews really have helped to shape this holiday into something different than a lot of Christian clergy might have wanted it to remain.
Well, it's interesting because I did like what the priest in the movie was talking about, right? He quipped that he at one point in his career was a mall Santa Claus. And while there's certainly, I think, people that have that feeling, right? We see that in the Jewish community too, people that are upset about the commercialization, and other people that are more okay with it. Like I like the gift giving and exchanging on Hanukkah, even though there's no traditional religious reason for it. But it's nice sometimes to give people you love and you care about gifts. And I mean, I like what the priest was talking about, this idea of it being that there's the Christian aspects, but there's these universal aspects of it. The idea of charity, of caring for people, of thinking about people other than yourself, that those are really universal values. And that's really, I think, where the Jewish impact was, we saw was that it was clinging onto those values, those ideas of it. The music and the stories and all of that was about those parts of the Christmas um, holiday. I'm curious what you think of, were these Christian values that we latched onto, or are these Jewish values that the Christian world kind of took on? I love the philosopher Nietzsche. He talks about Jews. He says we did a transvaluation of values, and he blames us for making the world care about the poor person, thinking that humility is better than being strong and beautiful, thinking that learning's better than physical prowess and all of that. He says that was our fault, is what Nietzsche says. So I'm curious, in a sense, of the Christian world and these values of humility and charity. Are those, like, is it Jewish to latch onto those values, or are those part of our impact on the world to begin with? Did we influence Christmas before we wrote these songs? Does that
Well,
make
I'll tell you,
sense?
if I was Fox News, and nothing against Fox News, but I would talk about America being founded on Judeo Christian values. And I know that Jews love that. When they hear that word, who knows when that term was invented, Judeo Christian values. But when Jews hear those words together, like it is our common sense of what makes a good life, what defines a good life, that sustains this dream of an America. Um, that's, I think, what you're speaking to, right? That Jews, maybe in writing these lyrics, latched onto what we held in common, and maybe in a way we're saying, look, these are the things we can all celebrate together. Uh,
I think there's a step further. I want to claim almost that not that we invented those values, but those are Jewish values, and we came first, so to speak, right? That's why, as you mentioned, right, Jesus was born a Jew, and obviously there's another religion, another faith that developed out of that. But before Judaism, monotheism was not a commonly held belief at all. You mentioned before the war to make Christmas more religious. What about the war on Christmas in general? Like a few years ago, Starbucks went on to take off Merry Christmas cups to just have Happy Holiday cups. Curious what you think of that, because I've never been bothered by by Christmas displays, kind of in and of themselves, and display of that around the holidays. I'm curious your thoughts, Rabbi.
well, that's what I'm saying. We should think carefully about. I think this trend of turning Christmas into a um, cultural or civic holiday rather than a religious holiday. Um, as somebody who cares passionately, obviously, both of us care passionately, obviously, about our religious traditions and want to see them survive in their authentic forms, I think it should disturb all of us that a holiday which really does mean a lot to um, the largest faith in the world is under attack. I think that is something that should bother us. There is nothing wrong to me about uh, living in a culture where the majority of people celebrate um, celebrate a religious holiday that we don't celebrate. Um, in the same way that I would say, like your experience in Israel, what would be wrong about you celebrating Hanukkah and in a country where many people do not? Um, there's no need for us to develop some sort of false holiday with no origin just to make everybody feel included. That's just my take on the matter.
I think part of it goes back to the idea of the folk religion, though, right? So much of modern Christmas is not Christmas 200 years ago or 300 years ago or 400 years ago, but Christmas 300 years ago is not the same as Christmas 500 years ago. So which is, at what point does a new phenomenon no longer become that kind of new thing, changing it versus become an accepted part of it on its own?
Now that's a really interesting question. Okay, that was the best question you asked so far tonight. If we've seen that Christmas changes from different and still today looks very different in one place than another. What does the future of Christmas look like in North America? And is it a holiday where there is going to be more room for Jews? And that's an interesting question. Are more younger Jews putting up Hanukkah bushes or holiday bushes or whatever you want to call them? Are more young Jews giving Christmas gifts? Is it being seen as less taboo, perhaps, even in Canada, than it may have been a generation ago, right? Maybe a generation ago, it was their holiday, not ours. But if we're going to keep saying, no, it's cultural, it's Coca-Cola Santa Claus. It's not Saint Nick. Um, what might Christmas look like in another generation from now? And maybe we'll be having Zoom programs and other gatherings in the synagogue to commemorate this cultural holiday, which I know seems crazy, but Rabbi Sachs, if I'm not mistaken, there are many synagogues in the States that have Thanksgiving services, isn't there?
Yeah, they do a special service on
Right. Even
Thanksgiving.
Orthodox shuls where a Thanksgiving service is held.
I
On the
saw
Shabbat,
here
maybe
at the synagogue,
closest
there was
to
a
Thanksgiving.
beautiful Hallel from a major Orthodox synagogue that they put on this year. They did a whole virtual program with speakers and Hallel and everything for
Right.
Thanksgiving. It was
Yeah.
really quite moving.
Rabbi Saul Lieberman of blessed memory, who's the famous Talmud scholar at the seminary, he apparently taught that Tachanun, which is the prayer in the morning service that is never to be recited on special days, ought not be recited on Thanksgiving. So here's a holiday that is completely cultural, uh, that became, in the eyes of some very learned and serious Talmudic scholars, a holiday that deserved recognition and affirmation and commemoration by Jews, even within the liturgy. Might that happen to Christmas? Now, that is a fascinating question.
I'm also
Um,
curious in the opposite end, though, the religious aspect. Like we talked about, something becomes part of the religion when enough people in the religion do it, even if the leadership don't want it
yes,
done. So Christmas trees weren't always a part of Christmas, right? They were part of some pagan festival and other festivals, and kind of got brought into it. That some church leaders didn't necessarily want them to be a part of it. Versus now, right? You or other rabbis would say to a Jewish person who wants to put up a tree that you don't do that. That's a Christian thing. That's a religious thing. It's part of Christmas. But if Christians all decided that on December 3rd they were going to wear green hats, and that it had, and they gave that some kind of a religious meaning, it was to remember whatever it is, would it then become wrong for a Jewish person to wear a green hat on December 3rd, even though it was not historically a religious thing, but it became that?
right. So that is called in Jewish law chukot hagoyim or chukos hagoyim, right? And actually, a few years ago with my Talmud study group, I see Lou and Anna Van Delman on the call. You remember we studied this? You remember we studied chukos hagoyim? Chukos hagoyim is actually a section of laws in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, that teach that you're not allowed to do things that originate in non-Jewish places. One of the famous um, rulings of the late Rabbi Soloveitchik was, you're not allowed to sing Adon Olam at the end of Shabbat morning services. We studied his responsum on this because it follows Chukot Hagoyim. You know, Beth Tikva and most conservative shuls, we always end Shabbat morning services with Adon Olam. Now, if you look at a traditional Siddur, Adon Olam is not in the liturgy at the end of Shabbat morning services. Actually, Adon Olam is recited early on in the service. It's right at the beginning of the Siddur. Yigdal too. It's supposed to be recited as part of the preliminary prayers. So why do we sing Adon Olam at the end of service? Well, guess how every church service ends? With a hymn. So Jews liked the idea of ending the service with a hymn. Probably the recitation or the singing of Adon Olam at the end of service comes from the church. The tune, 90% of the time of Adon Olam, is probably a non-Jewish tune. So the late Rabbi Soloveitchik said it is forbidden to sing Adon Olam at the end of services because of Chukot HaGoyim. And what you see is that the rabbis, the rabbinic leadership, generally on these issues takes a very firm position. Anything that originates from the outside world, stay away from. And I could see, as Christmas starts to infiltrate, the cultural Christmas, let's call it, starts to infiltrate into Jewish observance, I could see rabbis taking a strong stance against it. And at the end of the day, people doing whatever they want, because you can't stop Amcha, the people, from doing what they want to do. And as you and I know, Rabbi Sachs, there, as you mentioned about Aleinu, there are some parts of the service that if we ever even tried to get rid of, we would lose our jobs. They're part of the canon of folk prayer that have become very important to people, and we can fight against it as much as we want. But uh,
Ending by noon.
What's that?
Ending by noon, I think, has become a part of that canon as well.
Perhaps at Beth Tikva. But but the singing of certain songs, the tunes that people know, they become part of people's practices, and rabbis can remind people to be careful about these lines and where we cross them, and how we should remind people that Christmas is not just some joke of a holiday, that it does commemorate something serious. And it is important as Jews to distinguish ourselves from the outside culture. That's the only gear we have to fight against assimilation is remarking and affirming the things that make us distinct, and we shouldn't be ashamed of those things. And at the same time, understanding that we only have limited power. Rabbis have limited power, and we can maybe help guide things a little bit left or right, but generally the ship is moving where people want it to move.
So I just want to say, I just posted in the chat. If anybody has any questions, please. I think I have the sense we're wrapping up soon. So if you want to send them in the chat, if you do have questions and you're not following it, now's your opportunity to do that.
There
I
was
thought it was
an
very interesting.
interesting comment that about um, Christmas, about your comment about the German Santa. Can you say more about that?
So it's not this German saying he's an assistant to Santa, Krampus.
Ah, okay.
Krampus, who is some demon or ghoul, I don't know what the right word is, some figure that went around with Santa. And while Santa gave things to the good kids, instead of a lump of coal, Krampus was a little more violent. I think in terms of beating and perhaps taking kids and eating them. I'm not no expert on it, the subject, but Krampus.
Interesting. Okay,
It's interesting
Krampus.
what you said before, though, about you mentioned a moment ago about how at some point it's about recognizing what makes us distinct and appreciating it, right? Being proud of it as opposed to trying to be like everyone else. And what I learned in the movie was not just that it's just a Jewish thing, but my favorite Christmas movie growing up was always Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which I realized I learned in this documentary was written by a Jew, and that the whole idea was right that it's his life, that this is how he felt of being made fun of for being different, but holding on to that Rudolph doesn't in the end change, but is eventually celebrated for his differences. So I guess it's fascinating to me that
Interesting.
interplay
Okay. Wow.
of those values, the values that we're talking about that are important to us are a part of that modern Christmas, at least. Maybe not the traditional religious one, they're part of that modern Christmas. Someone asked, can we discuss what was Christmas songs written by Jews' real intent? Uh, I imagine to become popular, I think, would be my guess. I don't know if you have another thought, Rabbi, but I would think that they're
You think
writing
it's all
songs that
commercial?
they were writing. These were songwriters who wrote popular music, and Christmas hits a great way to become popular, right? Popular music.
Maybe the intent, but what's more fascinating to me is what these songs actually did. They transformed. I think it's clear. These songs transformed Christmas and changed it, and actually helped, as you said, to make those who were different feel like they could take part in this holiday. Whether you go to church or not, you can sing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And we did that. We changed this holiday from being a night of terror and fright. I'm not saying that that's what it was. By the way, somebody mentioned, well, that's not the way Christmas was celebrated here and there. As I was saying, Christmas celebrated different ways in different places. And certainly in Eastern Europe, we know of a tradition, and I could send you this article of Christmas being a night of scares and terror and demons walking around. And look what we did. Look what this music did. Look what Coca-Cola did. The holiday is totally different now, and the songs had the role of um, widening the tent of Christmas and bringing us in for good and for bad.
Um, we have a question which I have to admit I have absolutely no idea. I'm way too osteonormative. I have to
Okay.
apologize. But you might know, Rabbi, or it might be something we'll have to do a program on next year. But was there ever any tendency in Jewish diaspora communities in the Islamic world to incorporate Islamic holiday traditions? And what was the response from the Sephardic rabbinate? Have you ever heard of anything along those lines? I'm sure it's happened in communities that lived close by, but I'm just not familiar with it.
Um, yes, I know the answer is yes. Um, Particularly in uh, places where Jews were more accepted in the Islamic world, places like Iran, um, places like Syria. On Muslim holidays, Jews would also take part and they would have their own version of whatever Muslim holiday was going on. But in many cases, I think it was just a feast, a meal, some way of saying, let's be part of the spirit that's surrounding us. I don't know of any case in the Muslim world where Jews actually put themselves in the picture of the holiday that was being celebrated. That to me is what is most fascinating about Nittelnacht, is that this is a day, this is a Jewish commemoration. It's not Christmas. Nittelnacht is our day. We have our own legend and our own story about what's happening in our world on this night. In some ways, it's parallel to the Christian version. In other ways, it's not. But on both sides of town, we are marking this event. And that interplay between Judaism and Christianity, I think, is very unique. Probably because it's Talmudic, which is not the case for the story of Jews in the Muslim world, right? We don't know of Muhammad because he existed after the Talmud. So the Jewish interactions with Islam are much later. But because Jesus is part of our story, he's right there in the Talmud. We have legends about him. We're able to see ourselves in Christmas in a way that I think Jews could not in the Muslim world in Muslim holidays. And by the way, there's a whole other lecture that we could give on Passover and Easter. You know that on this same topic, because if you think Nittelnach and Christmas intersect, well, Nittelnach was just some folk holiday. Passover is the major observance of Judaism. And, one of the major contentions of Passover, why is it that Moses doesn't appear in the Haggadah anywhere? Why is that famous passage in the Haggadah, we only God and to God alone do we give thanks tonight, not by spirit, not by any interfering angel, not by any servant, not by any messenger, but only to God do we give glory. That's right there in the Haggadah. And people say that was a shot at the Christians across the city, right there in the book, saying, "Look at you, on in your circles on Easter night. You're talking about a guy. We're talking about the Holy One, and we're even excluding Moses from our Haggadah because we don't want to take any glory away from God." But again,
Right.
discussion.
So much of history, Judaism, at least halakhically, looked at Christianity and the idea of the Trinity as avodah zarah, or as idol worship, not idol worship, but as a right, sorry, it's not monotheism, it's
Blasphemy.
polytheism.
Right.
Blasphemy.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it too, right? That idea of saying, being very clear, we're not worshiping Moses here, we're worshiping God. You're
That's
worshiping
right.
three different deities that we're not sure how they work together.
And the same way on Christmas Eve, you're celebrating the birth of your Messiah. We're celebrating that we killed him. We're celebrating that we hung a blasphemer. Right? And we're going to be cautious because he might come back around his birthday to take retribution against us, but we deserve it. Of course he's going to be upset. Look what we did to him, but we're proud of what we did. We don't take that back. So we have our own little story to tell. Anyway, it's a bit of a digression from the theme of the movie. But as I said, every time I read about Mittelnacht, uh, it just becomes ever more fascinating to me. Any other questions you think are good in the chat?
I think that about does it. I really enjoyed chatting with you about Christmas. It's not what I imagined would be part of
Yeah.
my rabbinate, but I get new surprises every day. It's a
All I'll
pleasure.
say, but let me say this: this is sort of a happy conversation, maybe a little bit light, but this is a very serious conversation in many homes, particularly interfaith households, or even households with a partner who converted to Judaism, and therefore they have a whole family where for whom Christmas is really important. And this is not a light and easy discussion for them. Um, Christmas is part of a religious identity for a lot of people, a core part of the religious identity in this country. And I don't want to make light of that at all. And as much as these movies are fun, I really think the world would be a better place if Jews were better Jews and Christians were better Christians. I am not sure that all of the let's say de-religization, is that a word? De-religifying of Christianity has been such a good thing. And we're uh, we ought to think carefully about what the repercussions of too much acculturation of our holidays are in the long term for the integrity of religious life in this country, which is which is struggling right now, right? We didn't talk about that at all, but religion in Canada and the United States is on the attack, and how is under attack, excuse me, and how much of this discussion really relates to that theme.
It's again for me part of it. It's back that idea of the melting pot. For so long, Jews were stateless. Israel's a modern country, and for 2,000 years, we lived in other countries, and other countries were never secular. We lived in Muslim countries, we lived in Christian countries, and part of that was that the culture around us was that. And the Jews moving to America is really for the first time in a long time. In Germany, there was a time when Jews were a part of the largest society. But in America, we were part of society. And we like to use the language Judeo-Christian, but America is a Christian nation. If not de facto, or if not de jure, then de facto. America is a Christian nation. So there's this culture there. And I think a lot of this was just blending in to that culture.
Is it blending in, or is it the purposeful manipulation of the culture in order to make room, to have it make room for you purposefully?
Interesting. Um,
Right? And look, isn't that what this movie might lead you to believe? That we helped shape Christmas into something else.
yeah, I don't want to give us too much
Knowingly
credit.
or unknowing. It seems like I agree with you. It wasn't done willingly or consciously,
But
but this
we're
is
a
part of
part of
our
the
story.
shaping. I don't think
Yep.
solely responsible. We were a part of the story. We were a part of
Yep.
the story of Christmas being shaped. Certainly, I'll agree with that. Should we
So
thank
you
everyone for
have
joining us?
you have no presents this year, Rabbi Sachs, under your tree. I
It's
feel so bad
the
for you.
My mother sent me a couple of Hanukkah gifts earlier, so I did okay. I did
Well, I
okay.
think you were a good boy this year. I'll tell you that as a senior rabbi. This was a big year for you. You got married. I think what's his name? Frau, the German Santa's assistant. I
Oh,
don't think
Krampus.
Krampus will
Krampus.
not be visiting your home this year.
I appreciate it.
Don't
Uh,
worry about it.
I want to thank everyone for joining us. And I want to remind everyone that we have on New Year's Eve Joel Chasnoff, a really phenomenal comedian who will be doing a program with us. And it's also free, and you can find online all the registration details. We have over 150 people signed up, and it'll be great to raise a glass, have a toast, and laugh a little bit to end the year, because this was not a year with as much laughter as I would have liked. Although when I get to chat with you, Rabbi, it's always enjoyable and there's always good laughs. So
Speaking of comedy, if anybody, so I don't know what if you're all busy tonight, but I'm guessing most of us are just staying at home. If you haven't seen the gig on YouTube about the Jewish Christmas tree, I forget the name of the comedian. Maybe somebody could write it in the chat.
I know what
he
you're
he
talking
has
about.
this great bit about why Jews, okay, so we can influence Christmas music, but why, if there was a Jewish Christmas tree, we would have ruined the we would have ruined the whole thing by making all these rules for how tall the Christmas tree had to be and how wide it had to be and which forest you had to bring it from, because that's, oh, there we go. So Rabbi Sachs shared the link. If you're not doing anything, that is a
Elon
great.
Gold, it's very
There
funny.
you go.
Rabbi,
On
do you get this in your inbox at least a dozen times every year around
every
this
year I
time?
get it, and every year I'm cracking up. And
I
if
get it all the
anybody
time.
would
Every
like,
time I see it, it's great.
if
It's great.
anybody would like the article on Nittelnach, wants to read a real academic, it's about 30 pages, on the article on Nittelnach, and really read about this strange series of observances that Jews observe for a couple of centuries at least. Um, please send me an email, jrgrover@gmail.com. Just don't share it, please, with the Toronto Star. That's all we need, is this getting out there and having to respond. Uh, there's nobody I know of that celebrates Nittelnacht today.
Well,
Okay,
that
wishing everybody what? What do we wish everybody? Happy holidays. Happy Nittelnacht.
happy little Nacht. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you. Thank you.